even I go to Rwanda again on Monday with World Vision actually this time to talk about a water campaign. And people would typically say, well, what does water have to do with women's rights? And where is the correlation there?
She says rights, so the answer she's about to give should involve the correlation between water and rights. But is that what we see?
I think what's been really interesting is it's all so interconnected. And when you look at something like that, you say, okay, well, building wells, sure, you have the water and you have the life source, but what it also does is enables young girls to not have to walk miles to get water for their family, and instead they're able to stay in school, and that education is going to foster them being able to be very active in their society and empower female leadership.
She changed the correlation from rights to leadership. It's one thing to have rights, that should be a given. It's another thing to talk and make judgments about leadership, and how water is allegedly the way to leadership. She's speaking from a very much modern Western perspective which reveals what she values above all else, leadership.
That is not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
What are the biggest obstacles?
I think the biggest obstacles are perhaps people being set in their ways.
Entrenched.
Sure, like having a very clear, be it from what you learn at home or what you're comfortable with, change is difficult for people. And
she looks at the world from a modern perspective with terms like comfortable and change that people who struggle to survive don't have the luxury to even think about. But as always with these interviews, there's more, a lot more.
You watch some of these fathers or men who are supporting their wives or daughters in this, and perhaps in some communities, those men are shunned by their friends saying, what are you doing? You're upsetting a norm that's been comfortable for us. So it takes a lot of courage for anyone to be able to, fight against what has been customary and say, even if we've been doing this for a long time, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing that we should be doing. And I think it's time for change.
There we have it. Meghan thinks it's time for change. The statement underlines what we've observed so far. She projects what she wants onto the cultures that she visited on a brief vacation, without sufficient observations to decide how these cultures should be changed.
It's all relative to where we're talking about, and what's challenging when you ask a question like that is that you have to take into account the cultural context, right?
Yeah.
The irony.
It's challenging because I don't want to put that judgment on some things that certain cultures are comfortable with.
She says this right after she's just emphasized change. So which is it? The answer is neither, because this isn't about strong principles and morality. It's about making nice-sounding, career-advancing speeches for the sake of image.
What do you make of it locally here? What do you make of when you see things like Academy Awards and women don't get the same pay and they don't get the same shots at directing as men?
Right.
Why not faster in women men?
Well, we're certainly talking about it enough.
No, we're talking, but...
Yes, but where's the action?
Yeah. Words are easy.
I wish I had an answer for that.
I believe that. She wishes she had an answer for that. So when there's no answer, what's the next best thing? To act as your own interviewer, to make sure that the questions are comfortable.
I mean, certainly when it comes to the pay gap, it's staggering, right? And I think it is nonsensical. Do I have personal experience with it? Absolutely. Do I hope to see that change the more that we're talking about it and being very comfortable in those conversations? Yes.
It's impressive how such a short clip can raise so many questions. What's staggering specifically? What's nonsensical and why specifically? And what is Meghan's experience with this subject that hasn't even been properly defined? Meghan continues emphasizing ideology or pretend ideology, the kind of ideology that comes with career-advancing financial incentives.
But, between Jennifer Lawrence and that great op-ed that she wrote about it, or, Patricia Arquette being vocal about, it is now becoming more of the conversation. I think that is, I'm not going to criticize the speed in which it's taking for it to happen. My hope is that it just happens.
Hope that what happens exactly? All Meghan did was reference what actresses have said, without offering proof for their claims. So this is covert argumentation. With covert argumentation, the speaker doesn't prove her presuppositions, but simply presupposes them in the claims she makes.
Have you seen any personal effects of it? Has it ever affected you?
It's so interesting, and I gave a speech last year for International Women's Day with UN Women.
Larry's question makes sense considering that Meghan just finished saying that she has personal experience with this. But still, Meghan treats it as an uncomfortable question. While stroking her left arm and closing her eyes, she starts with the expression, which indicates acute self-awareness and awareness of the other person in the room. Coupled with the words, "It's so interesting." This is Meghan's way of admitting that the story that's about to follow differs from Larry's question. Notice the complete mismatch between question and answer.
And I was talking about an experience that I had when I was 11 years old. And the class was very small, and we were watching TV, and this commercial came on for a soap manufacturer, Ivory dishwashing liquid. And in the tagline of the commercial, it said, "Women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans." And two of the boys in my class said, "Yeah, that's where women belong, in the kitchen." And whatever it was in me at 11 years old, it sparked this frustration and this desire for change. And I went home and I said to my dad, "This is crazy and this can't." So Larry, I wrote a letter to Hillary Clinton. They changed the commercial to "People all over America."
It's interesting that Meghan's constantly guiding people to think what's interesting about her interesting stories.
It's so interesting. What was so interesting?
Ironically, when stories are actually interesting, there's no reason to say what's interesting about them. It's obvious. This speaks volumes about how preoccupied Meghan is with image, how she wants people to perceive her. And she uses a story which is more than 2 decades old, has nothing to do with payment, and involves questionable claims.
And two of the boys in my class said, "Yeah, that's where women belong, in the kitchen."
It's convenient how everyone says things that enforce Meghan's narrative. This part reminds me of the fictional dialogue.
Saying, "What are you doing? You're upsetting a norm that's been comfortable for us."
It doesn't sound oversimplifying at all.
I don't just want to show up somewhere and wave my hand and feel like that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm going to have my name attached to it or I'm going to do it, I really get very hands-on, which is exhausting, but you can sleep a lot better at night knowing that when you put your thumbprint on it.
Harry and I see the world so similarly in our approach of being very hands-on with things.
And really putting my own personal thumbprint on it.
This comparison to a less desirable group makes her look that much better, linguistically, that is.
I don't just want to show up somewhere and wave my hand and it's exhausting, but...
And next, we find out how she defines exhausting.
But yeah, shadowing was crazy. Sitting in... seeing some of the briefings for what they're going to say to Ban Ki-moon, our UN Secretary General, and understanding how that piece of it works, or understanding different pillars of an organization where they'll say, okay, there's meetings about the environment, and then there's a meeting about health and wellness, and a meeting about safety and security, and then a meeting about women's issues. And you go, okay, but aren't women affected by all of those things? Right? Like you can see where pieces of the puzzle are missing, and I think for me it's really helpful to just be able to experience it so I can speak better about it and do more about it.
Which pieces are missing, and how does she specifically help put the puzzle back together? What she's describing isn't work, it's a guided tour. Thus, she fails to provide sufficient grounds for her claim that the work is exhausting, and that it's work at all.
I love women who I am able to look up to and say, they have done so much in terms of leadership, but also promoting diversity and what she's like USA Network especially. I feel really proud of. They've really embraced changing the landscape of television in that way.
Meghan shows that she wants to talk about the buzzword rather than detailing the leadership part, which would have added actual content to this interview. She's making the filmmakers sound like pioneers when the truth is there's been diversity in television and movies for more than 30 years. To ideologues, the truth is secondary to the cause, which isn't much of a cause at all.
And now I'm sure we have some questions from the audience.
We're going to start with a question from an online
I bet you
viewer.
have one in the front.
Okay.
Okay, so Tim would like to know, what advice would you give to a young aspiring actor graduating this year who also wants to be charitable and change the world?
Let's ignore the naivety of the question and focus on the answer, which is just as vague and irrelevant as the question.
Wow, Tim has a lot planned. I would say slow and steady wins the race. My mom always sends me little turtles from wherever she travels as a reminder of slow and steady wins the race.
It's worth noting that her answer isn't specific to philanthropy. Slow but steady wins the race is a phrase that could be applied to most situations in life. Meghan has a hard time describing what the actual work entails. So in that sense, it makes sense that she can't tell the brave, philanthropic Tim what to do.
It's a reminder of slow and steady wins the race. No, I think look, a couple pieces of advice I've been given that have really helped is that don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. And I think especially starting off when you're making a commitment to want to have a career choice or something that's high value to you, oftentimes people become really easily discouraged. And if you were just stick with it a little bit longer, you might see it change.
With the initial no, Meghan contrasts what she just said to what she's about to say. She lets us know that the slow but steady part was filler and/or an insufficient answer. We have another instance of Meghan resorting to a go-to response from her script after yet another moment of not knowing what to say.
That have really helped is that don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. It's so easy for us to get distracted and to lose interest, but they said, don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years.
This shows that the script means more to her than engaging in the conversation in the moment. Because once again, this answer isn't about what, but how. And the how is just as unsurprisingly generic as the slow but steady advice. Also, she obviously didn't take her own advice as far as the royal family is concerned. She gave it 5 minutes, but not 5 years. It wasn't so much that they left as it was the way they left.
Concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't.
Well,
the British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they're racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
There was concern about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't.
Contrary to Meghan's advice about not being discouraged and being deeply committed to a career change or cause, which sounds like something from a fortune cookie, by the way, the two of them prove that words and actions are two very different things.
I wasn't seeing it, but it's almost worse when you feel it through the expression of my mom or my friends or them calling me crying, just like, Meg, they're not protecting you. And I realized that it was all happening just because I was breathing.
This 18-second passage contains 3 instances of the personal pronoun I, 2 instances of the possessive pronoun my, 1 instance of the object pronoun me, and 1 instance of addressing herself as Meg in an overacted hyperbolic citation.
Like, Meg, they're not protecting you.
Which doesn't sound like a citation at all, but sounds like Meghan's own thoughts, channeled through her loved ones to make it seem like she wasn't alone in thinking this. So even in a scene like this, with the two of them supposedly watching the interview that's still causing damage to Harry's family, the audience is supposed to feel sorry for Meghan and Harry. An interview where learning the national anthem was stated as an actual problem.
But even down to like the national anthem. That's me late at night Googling.
So, in conclusion, when Meghan says this...
But being in these different villages, I think, it just puts a different level of perspective on the things we take for granted and the things that we complain about, right?
And this...
Don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. Oftentimes people become really easily discouraged, and if you were just stick with it a little bit longer, you might see it change.
It doesn't sound entirely convincing.
I will say I went into it naively. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't do any research about what that would mean.
You didn't do any research?
No. I've never looked up my husband online.